Live from the rooftop of the Hermann London Real Estate Group in beautiful downtown Maplewood, it's the St. Louis Realtor Podcast with your host, Adam Kruse.
Welcome everybody to the St. Louis Realtor Podcast, live from the rooftop of the Hermann London Real Estate Group in beautiful downtown Maplewood, Missouri. I'm your host, Adam Kruse, broker owner of the Hermann London Real Estate Group. Here with me, of course, is my co-host, Shannon St. Pierre.
Hello.
But we're excited today because we have a very special guest. Every podcast, we always ask people to email in their questions, and this longtime listener was willing to even come in and ask a bunch of questions. I want to introduce to everyone my friend, Henok Tekle.
Hey.
Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you started out by you emailed in 2 specific questions. And if it's okay with you, we'll kind of share those questions, answer them one by one. Keep asking questions the whole time. We'd love to hear your commentary. And I know you made some more questions while you're sitting there. So, ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Henok, can I give the people a little background on you?
Yeah.
All right. So, you are a homeowner. You are an investment property owner as well.
Correct.
And you're thinking of kind of doing what we would call moving up.
Yes.
Right? And so the first question that you wrote is how to decide if you want to rent your home or sell it and what to consider.
Yes.
Because the home that you and your wife live in, you're saying, should we rent it? Should we sell it? I don't know. Right?
Yeah. It's like you said, it's just a little small right now. And owning property is in our goals that we want to have a couple more properties, and why not keep it, because it's in a really good school district. So those are the things that we kind of considered, but I'm sure there's a lot of things that we're not thinking about that you guys could help us out with.
Sure. I think there's a lot of things that come into consideration. You know, like I'm curious why you would even consider keeping it and renting it. It sounds like you're saying, hey, I want to own rental properties.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to kind of jump around here and answer this question, I think, sort of willy-nilly, I think.
So we're going to focus on this one before just stating the next one.
Let's focus on this question first.
Yeah, so with this one, I guess, if you rent it, do you know the average rent for that area? And if so, do you know that you would actually make money? Because otherwise, what's the purpose in keeping it?
Yeah. So what we did was we tried to look on Zillow to see what other properties were kind of renting for. And actually, my wife, the number that she had was significantly higher. And I was like, there's no way we're going to be able to get it. That's how we started the research on it. And I think we would break even or maybe make $100 on it. But it's mainly paying down that equity because we have a shorter mortgage on that. And the way I look at it is, if it's paid off in 15 years, let's say we have a kid, the income that we would have from that, it would help to be able to pay for the college expense for our kid because of the income that would be coming in. It's more of a long play down the...
Long game.
Yeah, long game. Yep.
Okay. So it sounds like you have the reason for why you want to rent it, which is probably one of the biggest things for consideration, is what's your main goal. So your goal is not cash flow. Your goal is to have somebody pay down this mortgage, and in, how old is your daughter? 15 years or so?
Non-existent yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So even
Just,
better, right? So we even have more time.
Yep.
So your future child comes along. And so there are a lot of investors, and I know several that have done this, where they buy a building when a child technically is born, a building meaning a home or whatever, and put it on a 15-year mortgage, rent it out for it to be paid for monthly, or, rent it out for it, at least cover those costs. It doesn't necessarily cash flow, maybe $50, $100 maybe. Yep. And at the end of the day, you'll notice that $50 or $100 actually is not there because you're going to be doing other repairs, or you're going to be paying someone for maintenance and so on and so forth. But so I do know a lot of investors who buy a property and then put it on a 15-year mortgage, buy it down, and then when the child goes off to college, they refi it, take out that whole lump sum. So what? $150,000, maybe $200,000, and then that's what they use to pay for the college education. And again, continue to rent it out, so that new mortgage is now being paid again by that renter.
Yep.
Let me ask
So-
if you're going to do that. I mean, you said so your goal is not necessarily cash flow, but I think his goal is cash flow. You're just saying maybe you don't need the cash flow right now. But if you were going to do
But I
this,
think when you're talking in terms of cash flow in investment properties, cash flow somewhat implies a monthly cash
right.
flow. But he's not trying to cash flow anything. He's just trying to.
you're not. I mean, if you could make money every month starting
no,
today,
yeah,
wouldn't you?
You're trying. So he's saying, I want this to be my college plan for my kid. Instead of saving for the whatever the college savings plan is that the state has, this is a better way to maybe approach college savings.
But
Yeah.
I guess my question is, if Henok came in here today and said, "Hi, Adam, I'd like to buy a rental property," right?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, great. Would we sell him this house that he's currently thinking of keeping as a rental property?
Maybe. When someone comes in and says, I want to buy investment property, the number one thing I ask, one of the first things is,
Why?
what's your goal?
Uh-huh.
No. Is it to buy a building that hopefully appreciates, which I'm assuming maybe the house does, because you said it's an area that's a desirable school district. So now we're still assuming, that it will appreciate. And it is usually as a college plan versus cash flow. Now, so when people come in, they either say cash flow or appreciation.
Well, then, in your example that you gave, why would the investor take out a loan to pay for the college? Couldn't they sort of like use the monthly $1,500 or whatever that comes in to kind of pay for college?
That's the way I was thinking about it.
Well, I guess you can if you have an installment plan. Normally, you have to plunk down quite a bit. Like your first, your tuition payments usually come in
In a big chunks.
in bigger chunks. So I guess it depends on when the house is paid off. So if the house is paid off prior to the child going off to college, you're going to put those rental payments after the house is paid off in a new account, and it would hopefully build up. But normally, what investors do is buy a building when a child is born. Not necessarily. He's already thinking just way ahead. He's like one or two steps ahead of what most investors do.
That's such an interesting perspective that you're sharing with me, Shannon, because I've never thought about, I want to buy an investment property and just not make any money for 15 years.
Well, and because normally what we do is when we buy investment properties, we put it on a 30-year or buy it outright. You know what I mean? Like, it depends. So
You're
there's
saying
so many
we are
different
making
avenues.
money every month because they're paying down our loan for us.
Yes,
But my goal right now, I'm like, I want passive income. I want to make that extra money.
Right. So your goal is different. Your goal, you came in and said, I want to pay for a college education. And so that's my goal as well, is to buy a building to pay for both Milana and Maddox college education, because I've tried the college savings plan and it doesn't appreciate as fast as a building does.
But ideally, he would also, in the meantime, before college, he'd be getting, a couple $100 extra if possible to help pay for his current home and his current dinners out with his wife or whatever, if possible. And I guess, so the question that someone should consider is the home that you currently own, probably have a mortgage on, is it a good deal? Is it a good investment? I mean, would it be a good investment property? I mean, the 3 times.
All right.
the charm.
So then would it be, if he walked in here today and said, is this a house to buy for an investment? I mean, then we'd have to have a whole set of questions, different kinds of questions.
And my attitude is that I would say no. Oh, you're going to maybe make $50 a month. Probably not the best one to buy. Your attitude is someone might be like, well, it's like a sure thing because it's going to appreciate. It's going to be in a good area. It's never going to be worth less. I'm always going to have renters.
That's all true and good. However, then the next set of questions is, but do you need this house to sell, or do you have another form of down payment? And can you qualify for additional mortgages, even though you will rent this out and there's a formulation that they'll use.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying your next thing to consider is, do you have to sell it to take your equity out to use it as a down payment on the next house?
Yeah, to really, truly, because you also said one of his goals is to upsize, or you said that.
Yep. Yeah.
So in the part of the consideration for keeping or selling this house is because his next step is upsizing. So typically when you upsize, part of buying a first-time home or a home is you building that equity and that appreciation together to be able to upsize.
Sell your home, get a big chunk of cash, and put it down.
Yes, and that's how you upsize typically in a normal scenario. If that's not the case for you necessarily, like you could keep this and you have another form of a down payment, then and then you have to take that into consideration, because do you have a 20% down payment, or will you be paying mortgage insurance every month? And is that now worth, I mean, depending on the price point of a home that you purchase, that mortgage insurance can be set a couple $100s a month.
I guess in theory, someone could keep their current home. If they have a bunch of equity, they could take out a home equity loan. You know, check with your lender about this, but take out a home equity loan and use that as a down payment on their next home. But then they really need to
get
consider,
that 20% at the very least, so they're not paying that mortgage insurance.
There you go. And so then they need to consider their payment on that home equity loan, though. And would they consider that as an expense towards the new rental property?
Yes.
Or would they consider that as an expense towards their new house? In their mind.
Well, it's going to all end up being the same, because it's
the same, but if we go,
oh
my God, this rental property is a money loser now with this extra payment in it.
No, they just say that as your debt.
I'm saying, like, when we're sitting here evaluating it on our own spreadsheets, not the lender. I think I would put the payment for that home equity line towards the upsized house in my mind, not towards the rental property. Because if you start charging it to the rental property, then the rental property is really going to make less cash flow.
Now it's negative.
Yeah, now you're losing money every month. But you wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for needing the down payment. So do you mind if I kind of go through some of the general expenses that you're going to have when you rent a home?
Yeah.
That may not be, which is what you're saying, you're not sure what to consider?
Yeah, so when you're doing your spreadsheet, you should consider your current mortgage payment, obviously, your insurance costs, which for a lot of people is considered in their mortgage payment, repairs. I expect, when I'm doing this, I anticipate 10% of whatever the monthly rent is to go towards what I call maintenance. So repairs and maintenance. Taxes, again, a lot of people, their taxes are included in their mortgage payment. HOA fees, if it's in a subdivision or in a condo. Management fees, if you're going to use a property manager. When I'm evaluating a property, I like to put management fees onto my spreadsheet, even though I might just manage the property myself. I'd like the property to be profitable, even if I wanted to hire a manager. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've talked about this just in case you end up moving out of town or you get a job transfer.
Yeah, you might end up having to hire a management company. Vacancies. So I personally like to put in 10% kind of a withhold or whatever for vacancy in case it's empty for a month or so when the tenant moves out and you're looking for the next tenant. Commission, if you're going to pay a real estate agent commission to find a tenant for the property. And, this says advertising. So if you're going to rent your property by yourself and do some of your own advertising.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was, I think 10% of the rent going towards a emergency fund of maintenance fund, I think is what you said. Do you get to a certain point where, let's say you have one property, because I have one property, and what I did was I did that maintenance fee until I got to a certain amount that whatever
could possibly happen.
Yeah. I could just cover it with that amount. Do you still consider, do you just keep putting into that?
Well, yeah. I mean, so for me, I'm a little bit crazy. I like to keep about $5,000 per rental property, per unit of each rental property, and what I call a maintenance reserve. So I actually have the management company hold that $5,000, right? And do I keep growing that bigger than $5,000? No, I don't. But I think what I'm finding and what the kind of the equation is expecting is that every year I'm probably going to be spending at least some 10% of that. I just had a water heater break on one of my properties. Okay, I got to send out someone and spend probably a few hundred, if not $800, on a new water heater or something like that. That kind of stuff is just going to come up. And so even if it hasn't come up for you every year, all of a sudden one year you might need a big thing, like a new furnace or a new roof or something like that. And you'll probably end up maybe using 2 years if you had a good year where you had very low expenses.
you like to have a big cushion. So typically when we sit around and work out numbers for rental properties, he'll take 30% off the top just like that.
Yeah, that's management, maintenance, and vacancy.
Where typically it's 5% for vacancies, what most people take
Well,
on
that's
the average. So
they might do that, but I mean, if you think about it, I hire a realtor to list my home for lease in most cases, and I'm generally paying out 1 month's rent.
yes.
Right, so 1 divided by 12 is 8.3% already. I think, check my math, but I think that's like 8.3%. So then if it takes them more than a month or a month and 2 weeks or whatever, I'm at my 10%.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know. I think 10% is pretty reasonable.
So what is a typical fee for a agent to go rent my house out? And is there any guarantee that you sign a lease for 6 months or not 6 months? I'm sorry, usually a year. If they leave early, is there something that you work out with your agent that they go find somebody at a lower cost?
So I think I have to be kind of careful about how we answer this because we're on the air or whatever. I don't want to set commission standards or whatever like that. But I would say that roughly it's in general going to be somewhere around 1 month's rent to find a tenant. And what I've seen is the listing agent keeps the lion's share of that. And then the agent that's representing the tenant is going to keep a lot less of that. Okay. And so, but it's still around 1 month's rent charged to you, the property owner. Can you find an agent who will do it for more or less? Probably. Sure. And then in terms of what if the tenant stops paying after 6 months or something like that? There's lots of different types of things you can put into your lease to try to protect yourself there. I've heard of companies having like a renter guarantee or something like that, where they will re-rent it for you for free if the tenant doesn't stay for a certain amount of time. One of the things that I've seen people do that we like to do is have like a 2 month equivalent to 2 month lease breaking fee. So if our tenant emails us and says, just broke up with my boyfriend, whatever, I need to move out, I want to break the lease, we have in there a set fee. And I argued that to the death for a long time. But what we found is that people are more likely to pay that fee knowing what it is than when we didn't have it and they just didn't know what was going to happen. They would sort of ghost out, and then we'd be trying to go after them for the rest of the lease or something like that, so we're more likely to collect that fee because people know what it is. All right, so then some other things that someone should consider if they're trying to decide if they want to rent their home or sell it on the renting side is kind of, are they okay with being a landlord? The reason that our company started a property management company was back in the sort of the market crash of 2000, I call it 2007, 2008, that time frame. We would go to listing appointments and we would say, hey, we'd love to sell your house. This is going to be great. It looks like we can sell your house for $150,000. And they'd say, well, we owe $170,000, and we're like, oh gosh, call us when you want to lose $20,000, And so what we found then is we're going, wait, hold on. What is your payment? They're like $800. I'm just throwing numbers out here. We're like, dang, well, this thing can rent for $1,100. Right. And they're like, oh, okay, that's an option. But what if the toilet leaks at night, and they got to call me or something like that? So then we're like, well, we'll manage it for you too. And that's kind of how our management company started. But a lot of people are not comfortable with the idea of being a landlord. We did have some people in those cases that would say, oh no, I'd rather lose the $10,000, and
Then have to deal with the tenant.
Then have to deal with this sort of unknown thing out there about what expenses am I going to be facing? What's going to be happening? What emotions am I going to feel when I drive past the house and they don't take as good a care of the yard as I used to?
Right. And that's the other thing. No tenant is going to take care of your house. It's one thing to come in and buy an investment property and you have no real emotional attachment to it. I think it's another thing to lease out your personal home that you were living in, that you have this emotional attachment to, because there isn't anyone, even if they are an awesome renter and tenant, that is going to take as good a care of the home as you do.
You're absolutely correct. My home that is a rental right now, the first couple of people, I had a hard time when I would go in there and check it, and I'd be like, oh God, why are you, and I was like, I can't, I had to change that mindset of like, this is not my house anymore. This is this is
Investment
investment
it's
property.
investment.
And I think my wife might have a harder time because this was her first house that she bought, and to her, it's like, why
Yeah.
do they change the paint color, or why
Well,
do they do
and
this
so
and that?
things like that should be in the lease anyway about changing like actual like paint colors and stuff like that. But then if you go in, it's never going to be as clean. It's not going to be dusted. It's not going to be fine tuned. There's going to be nicks and dents, and that's kind of part of that consideration of taking in that maintenance cost. It's not just the heater or the AC or the roof, or but it's fixing it back up when you want to actually go sell it.
Totally.
Yep.
My wife makes fun of me because when we drive, we used to live in these 2 different homes on the hill, and whenever we drive past them, I'm always commenting about the yard on the one, and I don't like where the new people on the other one where they keep the trash cans. And she's always like, we drive by, she's like, here it comes, and I'm like, what are they doing with that there? Like she's always making fun of me. So, keeping another thing to keep in consideration is the market. Is the market going to go up or down in your mind, in your crystal ball, right? If the market's going to go up, maybe you want to keep the property. If it's going to go down, maybe it's a good time to sell it and like cash out while you can, So what does your crystal ball say at the time, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, nobody can predict that, so I don't want to comment just because I don't want to back us into a corner. But typically, homes appreciate, right, over time. And if you bought it and if it's in a really good position, you got it for a good enough deal. And, like even if it crashed, you're still just going to keep paying off that mortgage anyway. So, because it sounds like once you decide which way you go with this particular home, the home you're living in now, once you head down that path, you're going to stay on that path.
So consult a tax accountant about this one, but there are potentially a lot of tax benefits to you for owning a rental property. Depreciating the chattel, all that kind of stuff, writing off your interest, those types of things. So if you're the type of person who wants to save on their taxes and kind of thinks it's worth it, that's another thing to consider if you want to rent it. Now, selling. Let's talk about selling. So if you do sell, you'll have a lot less headaches, right? Because you won't have tenants you'll have to deal with. You won't have to drive past the property and do maintenance. You won't
get calls in the middle of the night that the light bulb burnt out.
Yeah. And then you'll have your big down payment, so there's obviously pros and
it's
cons
like
to
a
both.
cut and dry. So either you decide to move on, you keep it as an intentional specific purpose of a college education type thing for your reasoning, or you just move on with your life. You sell it and you move on.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on what you're willing to take on.
Okay, your next question was how to deal with junky neighbors when trying to sell your home. Those are your words, not mine.
How do you feel about like where you're at now? Like,
Oh, yeah.
after we
Okay,
just
sorry.
had that whole question.
So are you going to rent or sell? Or you need to do some evaluating?
I think I'm gonna rent. Like I already have a rental property, so for me, I
already know what you're in for.
And each time I rent out to different people, I learn something new about like the screening process or things that I should add to the contract. It's it's being married now, and I got somebody else that I have to take into consideration when making the decision. But my wife is definitely on board with it, but I was just trying to make sure that okay, now this would mean I would have 3 houses, and it's like okay, it's different when you have one house that is your residence and then one rental. Now it's 2 rentals plus a home that you live in.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so and you would keep that house, you wouldn't sell it and take the money and buy another different rental property or 2 or 3 or a 4-family building or something.
Well,
like
I kind of thought about that also because it's like we could just sell that and then use that to go buy a 4-family flat in a place that is, up and coming or that is already maybe.
But I still think you could use that. Still keep that house take out a home equity line of credit and still do the same thing.
If he's been living there long enough and has enough equity, totally.
Yeah, that's assuming there's equity in the house. That's for sure.
Yep.
But you're assuming the same thing by saying you're going to sell that house, have your down payment, and go buy other rental properties. So you're saying the exact same thing.
Totally.
It just depends on how you want to go about it. But and I'm a big proponent for using home equity lines of credit on your rental properties too.
Yeah.
So the other one that you have. Right.
Yep.
So taking out a home equity line of credit and leveraging that equity to buy another property, though.
Yep.
And now that's a
Different,
a different approach, and it's a little bit maybe riskier. It's not for everybody.
Yep.
But
so a question for you guys, staying on the rental thing, because these are things that I kind of learned the hard way. But it's like, it's always like you go have, if you have a tenant that you're about to rent out, or you have a rental property that needs to be rented out, how do you distinguish what's important when looking for a renter? Because, I do a background check. Yeah, I look at the credit score, and then it's like, what's a good credit score to to be like, okay, this is.
So I don't know.
Decent.
I have mine, but I don't know. What
I know it's
legally,
and it's
like. Typical qualifications when people call to ask is, a credit score of maybe around 600-ish. If it's a little below that, like no criminal history, solid work history and current employment, a verification of the current employment has to be something that you do, as well as contact previous landlords. And then what else do we do? No bankruptcies. Like there's certain little criteria.
So do you do reference checks?
Yeah. Now we have a company that does it. Yeah.
Okay. And do they give back, because I would think that if I called somebody that had a bad tenant and now they want to move that from that place and move into my place, I would assume that landlord's like, oh yeah, they're great. Please get them out of my place.
Sure.
They might say that, but I think in general, it's the questions like, would you re-rent? And hopefully the people are honest, Okay. I mean, get them out of my place.
But I think some of their questions are really interesting. So the company itself asks, this new one that we've gone to asks some, I think, interesting questions. I mean, they ask, would you re-rent to them? Did you have did they have bed bugs? Did they have it's some really interesting questions that you're like, wow, okay, those are newer ones.
Roughly what I like to see is income that is at least 3 times whatever their rent is.
Okay.
So if the rent's $1,000, I'd like to see verifiable income of at least $3,000 in total between all the adults in the home.
Okay.
Right?
That's a good tip. I didn't,
Yeah, the credit score thing and the criminal history and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's sort of, I think that totally varies. Depends on sort of the type of rental property it is. If it's like a lower income type of property, then in a lot of cases the people are going to have not as good of a credit score, But then if you want to get deeper into that, it's like, is it medical things that cause their credit problems? Is it evictions? Is it too many credit cards? What kind of stuff is hurting their credit? I like to tell people that we like to look at the full picture, because even if someone has an 800 credit score, but they're like an axe murderer, then we probably wouldn't want to accept them necessarily.
True.
You really have to be careful when you're doing this, because there's all these what they call protected classes, and you can't not rent to someone for all these different types of reasons, and things that the general good person or whatever wouldn't consider anyway.
Yeah.
It's like race, religion, sexual orientation, gender. In the city, it's source of income, familial status. There's things like that.
Okay.
And so, in general, you shouldn't, in my opinion anyway, you shouldn't be like, oh, I don't like your race, so I'm not going to rent to you.
And so there are a couple of people that investors that have had come to us just to lease out a place just because they want to take that back seat during the renting process, so they can never be accused of, any of those issues.
Yeah.
So they actually just kind of step out of that process and then take over the management
part of
once it's rented. Mm-hmm.
All right, your next question that you sent in was how to deal with junky neighbors when trying to sell your home. And I thought it'd be fun if we could, for a second, brainstorm on all the different things that your word, junky neighbors, could mean. And I think when you say that, I'm just from knowing you, you're talking about a person who has like all sorts of crap sitting around in their yard, right? It's like,
Yeah,
do
so what
you
brought
really
upon
need
this
the old?
question? Is there a specific scenario?
So my rental property, before I was going to sell it, the people next door, they had a ATV, like those all off-road, vehicles on the side of the house, along with like a trailer.
A four-wheeler type
like
thing?
Bigger than a four-wheeler.
Okay.
A little bit, like a four-wheeler. And then the backyard was just junky and just
Not well manicured in your eyes.
yeah.
Okay.
And in the front lawn, they had just like plastic chairs sitting, at their little in front of their front door, and
Like mismatched and half broken kind of thing.
yeah, and then a truck that was broken down, kind of on blocks because they were working on it, type of thing.
So some other examples that I've seen is like the neighbor has like literally plants growing out of their gutter. Like they just obviously do a really job maintaining their property. They don't do anything good with their yard. We've seen neighbors that are just crazy rude, So, I mean, I've been showing properties before. Hoarders is another one.
Yes.
Yeah. But I've been showing property before and the neighbor comes over and talks about how bad the neighborhood is or how terrible those people who lived in the house were, or, did you know that house has settling issues or whatever because they're trying to scare us off for some reason, What other examples do you have there?
Problem dogs.
Problem dogs, yeah. So we go to a house and we're like, look at this lovely backyard. Wouldn't you like to sit out here and barbecue on the weekends? And it's like, rah, 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 like
That's
3
happened more
dogs
than a
on
few
both
times.
sides are barking.
Yeah, where you can't carry on a conversation. You're looking at it, and the dogs are so loud. Mm-hmm. That's definitely a problem.
There's a lot of people that seem to like to go garage sailing, and they just don't quite make the stuff all the way in the house.
Overgrown lawns. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the super? What is it called? People that love to decorate for every holiday, and you got a big Easter bunny, or like during the.
Oh my gosh! Oh, we have a few around the neighborhood of the blow up,
Like Christmas.
the blow
Yeah,
up
it's like,
for
I get it.
Holiday every Christmas. There's one that I just laugh. He has them hanging out his window on top of the roof, every inch, and now it's even crawling into the neighbors. And so I'm always like, "Ooh, that's interesting."
Yeah.
We had a property where from the second floor window you could see into the neighbor's yard, and there was like 15 or so, I swear, huge bags full of empty beer cans. It's like the trash can's
Is that
right
a
there.
negative or a positive?
Yeah, it's like probably fun, but like there's
I'm not sure I see the negative in that one.
clean it up. It doesn't look great. So the question is, how do you deal with that, right?
Yeah.
Shannon, I'm going to leave you to this one. I think that there's situations where you can, like, if you want to, you can offer to help, like clean up.
Well, I think first and foremost, when you move into the home, I think it is your responsibility to be neighborly. I don't think that you have to be best friends with your neighbors, but I do think it is a responsibility to at least make nice. With your neighbors.
So you're saying like start from the beginning.
From the beginning, I think you have to play fair and play nice.
Show up with a pie.
Yeah, introduce yourself and just be neighborly. And if they are obnoxious or totally not your kind and junk, like to go garage sailing and throw it all in the backyard, whatever. So it's not your thing. And what you have to remember is art's in the eye of the beholder, right? So they don't have a problem with it. You might find it to be an eyesore, but then you have to remember that's your problem. That's not their problem. So you have to make sure that the approach on this is that you carefully approach it. So, and then the second thing is that you have to be a good you can't cast stones when your own property is in need of a few touch-ups too.
So do you think
are you guys answering it from the point of perspective that I end up buying the house and then?
No, she was just starting off with like, hey, when you bought this house that you're now considering selling,
gotcha.
you should
Are
have
you
been nice
friends
to those
with the
people in the
neighbor?
first place.
No.
And you've been rude to them this whole time, so now it's going to make it harder for you to show up with a pie and go, hey, how about you clean your junk off? Remember that bike that's been in your front yard for 6 months? How about that goes in the garage,
Or the cooler that's in the garage.
And then, so I guess then it goes into ask.
Yeah, ask. I think I'm saying when all else fails, communicate, right?
Yeah.
And just
So,
say.
I mean, and they may not know like that you're trying to sell the house and that you want, and so you kind of have to ask first and then two, offer solutions, offer to help. So maybe they can't afford it, or maybe, if you go over and say, can I clean up your yard? Can I do a little maintenance? Can I trim that out? I'm going to have an open house this weekend. They might be like, have at it, guy. Like,
I mean, it's going to help them anyway because essentially you're raising the property value. When you
right.
sell
And I
your
think it's
home,
worth pointing that out, that it's going to raise the property value.
And in your case, you might go like, hey guys, I know you don't like me. And so good news is if you can help me here, I'm going to be moving away.
Yeah. So it's also been suggested like for the hoarder or maybe for that four-wheeler, I'm not sure, is to offer to buy him a shed. I think it's a very interesting offer, but for a few $100, you could buy a shed and you could sell your house.
That seems extreme, right? But I mean, I guess
For a few $100 and you sell your house, like in the term of...
From those terms, it makes sense. But my fear is like I buy them a shed and then they put it up halfway and they don't put anything in it.
No, part of that is making sure it goes up and saying, can I help you put some stuff in there?
And then they don't buy
it's
some
kind
more
of the
stuff.
whole process. Yeah. So the junk cars, right, came up, right? So that's always a really hard one. So if they're not willing to have it towed off or move it or fix it, then the last option is obviously the municipality calling the city and complaining about it, a derelict vehicle.
Just start complaining about your neighbors.
Well, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean,
like your HOA or the city or whatever.
Yeah, the HOA. I mean, the city. But I don't know that they always do much about it because if it's on private property, that's kind of the hard thing too. What do you think? How would you take care of a?
I like that idea. My HOA has what they call they seem to have their own flexibility to call anything that they want to a nuisance. And so if the neighborhood didn't like the junk car, for example, I think they would probably, maybe not, I don't know if they could do it with a junk car if it's still working and it's registered and it's licensed and all that stuff. I don't know that they could just say, I don't like your Camaro or whatever. But a lot of the other junk and stuff, they could say that it's a nuisance and they can make you get rid of it.
Yeah, but I think when you're in, like, say, the city where there is no HOA or any type of, I think it can be a little bit harder. But
what about like a suggestive activity? Like if you're out there on a beautiful day and you're like cleaning up your yard, maybe that'll sort of motivate them to get out there and clean up their yard a little bit too, or something like that.
So yeah, beautification can be contagious. So if you do some curb appeal.
I like that. Beautification can be contagious.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you go, we're just doing a neighborhood cleanup project and we're going to start on your house.
Yes. Right. Or here, I have extra plants. Do you want to plant them, or do you want me to plant them?
Do you need these flowers? Mm-hmm. I'd like to buy that broken down bicycle from you.
That's a really good idea. Why don't you just start offering to buy some of the material, like some of the items in that, and say, "Hey,
I never thought about that.
Are you selling that?
Yeah. Great,
name your price, and then have it towed off to the junkyard. I guess I don't even know."
So I know we didn't give you any like super solid answers there. I think it seems like it's kind of on a case by case basis. Like,
have you guys done any of these things when you're trying to sell a house for somebody and you're realizing that you're going to have a hard time selling this house because of the
privacy fences go a long way too, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example.
Yes.
I just sold a house in Dogtown that did not have the best looking neighbors across the street, but in this market, it seems like it's just kind of a hot market anyway, and people were just buying anyway.
Well, I think that's a little bit more acceptable in the city too. You just get all kinds,
Yeah, different areas like the city, they have, a $500,000 house right next to a chunker or whatever.
Yeah, an LRA property.
There you go.
Yeah. So what about a privacy fence? Would that help with at least the backyard situation?
Yeah, I think I looked at doing a privacy fence, and I think it was just me being cost efficient. And like, why would I put a fence in if I'm going to be trying to sell this house? But it makes sense because to me that's better than having that awkward conversation with the neighbor that I don't want to have.
Well, you still might have to have that awkward conversation depending on the property lines. I don't know exactly where the house is, but in the city, they're usually fences are just kind of like, there's not usually two fences backed up to each other. It's just one fence. So you could either go in and say, hey, do you want to go in on this privacy fence? I'm adding it to my whole yard and trying to, it's a desirable feature and I'm getting ready to sell the house, just try and play it off a little bit.
Yep.
And see if they want to go in on their part. And if they say no, then you just go ahead and say, just do it. And say, do you mind if I do it? Or if it's on a property line. If it's within your property lines, then it's...
Gotcha.
Have you considered just not being so lame and maybe embracing this free living lifestyle? You know what I mean?
That's the other option.
Like, think about it, man. Just throw your junk anywhere you want. Like, take stuff out of your car and just throw it on the ground. This is...
You've known me for a very long time. That is not going to happen. That's you.
You've known me for a very long time. Okay, I think you had some other questions for us, don't you? Some other things you think the listeners would like to hear?
When I posted my rental, I had tons of people that wanted to come look at it, and I kind of did it on a like base by base. Like, okay, this first person's going to look at it. If they like it, great. Then that's the person I'm going to go with. If they meet all the criteria like that we kind of talked about before. How do you handle a situation?
So there's sort of like, I have kind of two answers or two directions to go with that question, I guess. There's, do you take the first person that applies if they would be acceptable? And then, but also, how do you deal with all the leads, right? I just listed a house. I bought a house in Sunset Hills recently. I've had over 180 leads on that property, meaning over 180 emails of people contacting me. What do I do? How do I do that? Did I literally have to go over to that house 180 times, So what our leasing agents do a lot is they'll kind of schedule open houses, and so they'll say, hey, I'll be there Thursday from 3 to 5 or Saturday from 1 to 2 or whatever, and which is amazing thing to do because one of the things that happens is someone emails you, says, hey, I want to see this house. You go, great. How's Thursday at 3? They go, awesome. That's perfect. And then you call them Thursday at 1. Hey, just wanted to confirm we're still going to meet Thursday at 3. And they go, awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely be there. And then you show up at the house Thursday at 3 and they never show up. And they won't answer your call and you just never hear from them again. And it seems like that's almost like 60 to 70% of the time. That's about what happens. Right. And so that's where the open houses come into play, where you can just save a lot of time. The other thing that's cool about the open house is now, in theory, there's 5 or 6 or whatever different people all at the house at the same time, so they get the perspective. This is a popular property, and it encourages them to take action sooner. And so then what we do is we let anyone who's interested, we let them apply, and then we like to go for the best, most qualified applicant. And there are perspectives out there that you should do it one by one because it could be considered like discriminatory or whatever, going against the things that we mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. But I just don't feel that way. If I have one person who's got great income, great credit, and good criminal history or whatever, but another person has better income, better credit or whatever, then like I'm making my decision based on that, not off of anything else other than that. Yeah. I want, as the landlord, I want the person who's most likely to A, pay the rent, B, take care of the property, and C, in my opinion, I want someone who's going to stay there a long time if possible.
Yeah. I like the idea of the open house because that was my issue. I had to, and I didn't live close.
Yeah.
It was a 30-minute drive. So each time I would have to go out there and show it and so then I started getting a little bit smarter. I'm like, okay, I would try to schedule them back to back, so one person would be there from 1 to 1:30 and the next person get there at 1:30, but
that's hard to do because you're like, okay, is 1:30 good for you? Okay, so yeah, we just typically take time blocks. I'll usually do anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. If it's I don't know that I've ever done 2 hours, but if you have to, if it's a really hot property, yeah, I mean, I just take a book and just like open up and be like, here you go ahead, walk it out and so an answer and be like, let me know how to answer questions. And then here's where you apply, so, I just kind of open the door and I tell them, I'm like, I'll have it open. I'll be there from 1 to 3.
And this last one I just did, I was over there and while they're looking around, I had my broom and I'm like sweeping up the front porch and the driveway and all this stuff. And it kept me occupied because I would be bored just sitting there for an hour. I like to sort of stay out of people's way. But also I wondered if did that sort of set some sort of mentality like, hey, this guy's the property owner. He likes to take care of his property. Like he's probably going to want us to do the same thing.
Well, sure. I mean, if it's your property, why not knock out a few tasks while you're over there for 2 hours and then have that be the time block that people come and take a look at the house.
But so what people do is, we have people go to hermanlondon.com/rent. Okay. And that's where they can go and they can apply. They pay their money for the application. It goes to a third party company that we use. And so to us, it doesn't have, I don't want this to be misconstrued, but we don't have any cost associated with somebody applying. So we would rather, more people apply and that way we can take the most qualified applicant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so it kind of does depend. Like if I don't know. Sometimes I don't know about having multiple applicants because I'm like, gosh, I feel bad if think about it. Renters get really upset if they have to pay $50 every time they have to apply somewhere, and then there's many applicants, and so they're spending 50, 100 now, and then 150, and so I'm like.
But it's not really. I just don't see it as fair. If I have an open house, 3 people are standing in front of me going, "I want the house. What do I do?" And I say, "Go apply." And one of them does it right there on their phone. One of them drives home and does it on their computer, and one of them does it when they get to work the next day. How is it fair that only the person who did it first gets? I don't know.
I'm not saying if they do it within a relatively short period of time in that way, like within that day, you get a couple. I think that, but after that, when people call, I'd be like. We've gotten a few applicants.
Totally, absolutely.
So if it's in a short amount of time, then I'm like, that does happen. Because when you do that open house type thing, when you give them this time block and there's 5 people walking through the house, they're like, oh, there's a rush to actually go ahead and apply versus sitting on it and humming around. And
I don't want to waste people's money either, but again, we've been burned so many times by people that say, I'm going to apply. Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah, now that does happen too.
And they never do.
Never hear from them again.
So God forbid you would tell everyone the rest of that day, oh, sorry, we already have someone that's going to apply. Then you just are not, it's not.
And that I've never done. I mean, until somebody actually applies, I don't call it done.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I learned last time is that I think from my previous experience, the person said they were going to apply and I kind of just waited and then a couple days later and then they changed their mind. I felt like I got burned from that. So then I went to the opposite extreme, like everybody apply. I'm going to look at it on this day and then kind of go from there. But then I felt back because I'm like, wow, I think it was like $50 and it wasn't coming to me. It was going to
the third party.
Yeah, third party. And they're like, but I paid. I was like, I'm sorry. Like I didn't like.
There's sometimes where they're like, well, I paid to apply. And we're like, but why did you? Like you have really, really bad, like,
yeah, and then
like,
so I do tell them the qualifications. That's why we give a roundabout qualifications, and it's with the exception of like case by case basis. Like just because you have some criminal.
If you have
history,
a 400 credit score, you should have maybe mentioned that to me before you spent your money on your application fee. I don't know.
And people do. They'll ask, what kind of credit score, and I'll be like, well, 600-ish.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like we've definitely taken lower.
Yeah,
totally.
But at the same time, so knowing the qualifications, that in of itself, they should know whether or not they qualify.
Well, we really appreciate you being here today, Henok. I love that you sent in these questions and then were willing to come in. Shannon and I have always kind of wanted a non-quote-unquote real estate person to be a guest, and so you're our first one. I hope the listeners are thinking, wow, must have been awesome for Henok. I really want to be a guest on their show now and come in and ask a bunch of questions.
Ask my own personal questions.
Ask my own personal questions,
right.
Yeah. If so, just email us just like Henok did, podcast@hermanlondon.com, Hermann with 2 N's, by the way, and just send us a message. I wanted to give a quick shout out to someone named Bill Gassett, because when you sent me your questions, we knew our own answers, but we wanted to make sure we had super kind of thorough answers. So I did some Googling, and this guy had a great website that had super thorough answers to both of our questions. So Bill Gassett is a realtor, I think, in Massachusetts, and I sort of used some of his ideas from his website today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me and answering my questions.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, perfect. And thanks, everyone, for listening, and take care.